Welcome to the TÜREB Talks. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have three distinguished speakers today. My name is Güray Erol from TÜREB. I'm the Secretary General of TÜREB, and I'm honored to introduce the three speakers. Today we will be speaking about the resiliency of wind energy in the pandemic time, which has been quite a challenging time. We will have our guest speakers as Dr. Fatih Birol, the Executive Director of IEA, Mr. Giles Dixon from Wind Europe, and Mr. Hakan Yıldırım from TÜREB, sharing their opinion with us. Before we start, I'd like to remind you a few points. The webinar is being recorded at the same time and is being broadcasted on YouTube. And we have interpretation both into English and Turkish. If you'd like to hear the Turkish interpretation, you have to click the Korean button. During the webinar, we will be receiving questions, and we'll be more than happy to receive your questions from the Q&A button down on the screen. And we will get your questions, and we'll try to spend as much time as possible for questions. Welcome again. Madrid, Paris, and Istanbul will be discussing the resiliency of wind energy in these challenging times of pandemic. And I'd like to kick off with the first question. First, Mr. Fatih, we will be glad to receive your opinion on a more global scale. Pandemic time has been a unique time, as you know, and we've been going through this unique time. And about the prices and energy consumption, the first impacts have been quite surprising to all of us. And what is your expectation about the impacts until the end of the year? And would you expect that the impacts would sustain through the end of the year? Thank you very much, Güray. And would like to welcome all of our guests, all of our attendees in Istanbul, Turkey. I will be speaking in Turkish though, and I will try my best to speak Turkish, I better say. When COVID's outbreak has first started early this year, we've decided that the impact of COVID in the energy sector should first be appreciated well, and then we will come to the point of discussing how the energy sector can play a positive role in having a positive result at the end of the crisis. First, we've determined the casualties, so to speak. I mean, we've tried to understand the damage that the pandemic has caused to the world. Energy consumption this year has been experiencing such a huge decline as has never been preceded before. I mean, comparing this maybe to 2008, which was the downturn time, you would remember, around the globe, there also was a decline in that time. But compared to that decline back in 2008, this decline is 7 times bigger than that. So it's been quite a harsh decline. And this decline has been observed in almost all the fuel types. The worst impact was on oil, of course, as you know. Oil is impacted both because the economy is getting into a decline, into a downturn. Second, because everybody is working on a home basis, and there has been a decline in consumption of oil because of travel cuts, because of lack of use of transportation. Electricity was also affected, but now we're getting through a small rebound upwards in electricity. Renewables, where the renewables sit in this equation, in this black picture, so to speak. I mean, the renewables has been the only bright spot. in the entire spectrum of energy resources. I mean, speaking relatively brighter, maybe the better way to say. As we experience a decline in the rest of the spectrum, renewables, particularly solar and wind, has gone, I mean, quite well. And even we've experienced a slight increase in these two domains. Another thing which I have to say is really relevant is carbon dioxide emissions. What happened to carbon dioxide emissions? In the carbon dioxide emissions, there is again another big decline. As we expected for this year, it's up to 8% of a decline in carbon dioxide emissions, which has never been the case since the Second World War. But here it just can be explained with a very critical point when we are also discussing about the climate change issues around the world. After this decline, with the recovery of the economies, will the emissions start going up again? Or would this be persistent stability, or will it even get to a deeper decline? Or are we expecting, as the consumption and production habits, energy preferences of individuals will come back to normal, will it come to an increase? And it's really important to learn from history, because history has taught us that after the big financial downturn in 2009, there was another decline in emissions, you would remember. But next year, I mean in 2010, there was a huge increase after the recovery of the global economy. So this increase in emissions back in 2009 has been the highest increase ever in the world history. So this rebound increase has been unique. So the question is, we're experiencing a decline in emissions this year. Should we expect the same rebound effect maybe next year or after the COVID time? I think this really is quite relevant for our discussion. And here, renewables, I think, specifically solar, wind, will have a big role to play, in my opinion, so that this rebound will be prevented. Maybe I should stop at this point, and then I will give other contributions as to what we need to do. If you would allow me, I would just say another few words. Thank you, Fatih Bey, for the comments.
Giles,
Giles.
To have your initial comments about the impacts of COVID-19 on energy industry, but for sure, especially about the wind energy. How was the European wind sector's reaction? Consumption trends, market prices, etc. were all surprising us. Do we expect such surprises again until the end of the year or not?
3 points, Guray. And first of all, hello to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be with you, speaking on behalf of the whole European wind industry, sharing our perspectives with you on wind in Europe and in Turkey. First of all, wind farms have continued to operate all of this year. They were defined as essential services by governments, part of energy supply, and the wind industry has succeeded in keeping all of the wind turbines operating. Secondly, we have continued to build new wind farms throughout Europe. This has been slightly more difficult. There have been some restrictions in the movement of workers and essential components, but we have largely overcome them, and we will install in Europe and in Turkey this year a significant number of new wind farms. Thirdly, the manufacturing of new wind turbines. This has been a challenge. We had to close a number of factories, notably in Spain and Italy at the height of the crisis in March and April. All the factories have now reopened, and they are all working, and there are 150 factories in Europe. They are all working close to full capacity, but there are still some delays in getting components into factories and getting finished products out of the factories. But by and large, the wind industry has proved that it is resilient. I'd quite like to share with you all the big picture of where wind energy is in Europe today and where Turkey fits into that. If I could just show you 3 or 4 slides, please. Thank you. First of all, if we could look at the map of Europe on the next slide, the blue bars show the gigawatts of wind energy installed in each country. The red bars show the share of wind energy in every country's electricity mix. So Turkey features quite well on this map. 8 gigawatts installed already, and wind is already 8% of your electricity supply. Across Europe as a whole, wind is now 15% of all of the electricity that we consume, and solar PV is a further 5%. So variable renewables are now 20% of all of Europe's electricity. Let us look at the next slide and we will see how the electricity mix is going to evolve in Europe from here to 2050. Fatih Bey, this is of course a slide you are familiar with from the 2019 World Energy Outlook, and it shows that wind energy, broken down here by onshore wind and offshore wind, will be the 2 most important sources of electricity in Europe going forward. Let us see what that means in terms of the increase in wind energy capacity in Europe on the next slide, please. So how much wind energy capacity do we have today? The dark blue is onshore capacity, the light blue is offshore. How much will we have in 2030? Significant growth in offshore, even bigger growth in onshore wind. And what does the European Union want us to have by 2050? Again, growth in offshore, but even bigger growth in onshore wind. And this is often overlooked. People often think that the further growth of wind energy in Europe will be driven by offshore wind. Yes, it will play a crucial role, but look at the total gigawatt increase in onshore wind capacity in Europe. Let's show this another way. On the next slide, we have 2 curves. The light blue is the growth in offshore wind, and even sharper in onshore wind, the growth in capacity from here through until 2050. Thank you for showing those slides. Let us now return to Turkey. Turkey really is a model for the expansion of wind energy for other countries in Europe and for other countries around the world. You have 8 gigawatts, it's 8% of your electricity. Turkey is in the top 10 of countries across the world in terms of installed wind capacity. Turkey has also developed a very significant manufacturing base for wind energy technology. There are 70 companies involved in manufacturing wind turbines or components of them in Turkey today. Now, this brings huge benefits, of course, to the Turkish economy: jobs, revenue, exports. Factories in Turkey are exporting wind turbines as far as Australia now. The second benefit of onshore wind for Turkey and any other country that embraces it is, in most of wider Europe now, onshore wind is the cheapest form of new power generation capacity. Onshore wind also brings a lot of direct benefits to local communities where you build wind farms. Every wind farm nearly in Europe is paying taxes to the local municipal government. It's a very important source of revenue for local town halls. And of course, it's creating local jobs. Every time you build 1 gigawatt of new onshore wind capacity, that creates 5,000 jobs in the planning, manufacturing, and operation of the wind farm, and a number of ongoing jobs in the operation and maintenance of the wind farm. And finally, onshore wind, of course, is very good for the environment. No greenhouse gases, we know that, but no other air pollutants and hardly any water consumption either. There is, yes, some energy consumed in the manufacturing of the turbines, but an onshore wind farm pays that back within 1 year of its 25 years of operation. I have some messages I'd like to share with colleagues from the Turkish government and Turkish authorities on the further expansion of onshore wind in Turkey. I don't know whether Güray Bey, now would be an appropriate moment to do that, or whether you'd prefer me to do that later in the discussion.
Please proceed. Let's have those messages. I believe those are important ones.
Okay. There are two messages. The first is, please be flexible in the deadline for commissioning those wind farms that are currently under construction. As I explained at the beginning, COVID-19 has resulted in some delays in the construction of wind farms across Europe and across the world. All governments across the world have extended the deadlines that they initially set to those wind farms that had won auctions, deadlines for completing the construction of those wind farms. And we hope that the Turkish government will be able to offer similar flexibility. I know this is currently under discussion in Ankara. My second message is the importance of clarity as soon as possible, please, on the auction schemes that are going to support and underpin the further expansion of wind energy in Turkey. Auctions are essential for the expansion of wind energy because they provide a perspective of stable revenues, which enables the wind farm developer then to go to the banks and the investors, and they can borrow money at much lower costs of capital because they have that perspective of revenue stability. So auctions are essential. It's very important that auction systems should be simple, that they should be clear, and that there should be maximum visibility about what auctions are going to be run in the coming years. Now, for Turkey, this applies both to the YEKA and whatever mechanism is introduced as the successor to the YEK dam. Keep it simple, keep it clear, and give maximum visibility. That is more important than the actual level of ambition. As the wind industry, where we're thinking, well, where are we going to build the new factories? Which countries are building the most new wind farms? Where does it make sense to have the factories? We prefer when a government is saying, we will auction 1,000 megawatts every year for the next 10 years. We prefer that to when a government says, we might auction 2,000 megawatts every year, but we're not sure. The visibility is what really matters and what really drives investment decisions. Two final points of detail on the auction design. Whatever auction systems are operating in Turkey, it's very important that there should be a price floor. Of course, competition is very important, but you can have auction schemes where the industry bid down and down and down, and they're competing each other, and you end up with winning prices that are actually very difficult for the industry to deliver, and that doesn't do anybody any good. You don't build wind farms, you end up with no industry. So please, a reasonable price floor. The price floor should be demanding, of course, but not so demanding. It needs to be at a level that as a government, you're confident that you're not going to have more people bidding at the price floor than capacity that you want to build. So you need to pitch it at a smart level. And finally, very important, we fully understand that in Turkey, you want to run these auction systems in Turkish lira, but it's very important that there should be a price escalation mechanism to mitigate and compensate for any impacts of inflation that might result from local currency devaluation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks, Giles, for those starting comments, opinions, infographics, and encouraging messages.
So I'd like to continue with you, Hakan. That's going to be exactly the same question. What is the reaction of the Turkish private industry against the COVID-19 pandemics? What the conditions were? I mean, in the name of the private industry, what would you say? Well, thank you very much, Güray. First of all, I'd like to thank both to Mr. Birol and Giles. They have always provided support to us. Anytime that we ask for their recommendations, suggestions, they push their busy schedule. With Mr. Birol, we discussed about the previous year in December and what would happen in the upcoming year. And we had no idea about what would happen to COVID-19. I mean, we were discussing totally different things. But right now, actually, we can understand how world can go through. I mean, quite an interesting experience for each and every one of us. Before starting with COVID-19, there were a couple of points I would like to underline. It's also mentioned by Giles, and as the Wind Europe CEO, he's really very closely following Turkey. And we also contacted with Giles and asked them about the best practices in Europe, in the countries in Europe, especially what governments and relevant authorities are doing with regards to wind power plants. We received information and conveyed it to the relevant authorities. Before starting with COVID, actually there are, in particular, of course, we always consider what we should do. And especially considering the previous decade, I think we have taken a lot of steps that we should be proud of. And at the same time, it is help us to be prosperous for our future as well. It is 8,300 megawatts of wind power plant that we have. And the statistics are published once in every 6 months, and the recent one published a couple of days ago. Over 94 investors, 197 different wind power plants, and over 3,350 rotating turbines that we have. And it is covering 8% of the total electricity generation traditionally, but during the COVID era, it was 9% in January and moved up to 10-11%. In May, we go up to 11%. In May 24 in particular, on a daily basis, it actually 73% of the entire total electricity demand from renewables and 13% from the wind power plant, especially including them. It's over 90%. This is May 24, and actually also the Minister of Energy published it in a tweet. Therefore, we actually have a huge contribution as the wind to this, and this is what we know. Another topic which I would like to underline is that, especially about what we did in the last decade, we succeeded in doing localization. Giles has just mentioned 70 different companies are offering over 15,000 job opportunities, and they do everything: the blade, the steel plates, the bolts, and we manufacture them, and 60-70% of the total capacity of these factories are used for export purposes. This is something that we really should be proud of. And what I always mention is that, especially once you have stable policies and everything is fine. I mean, especially in the last decade, we actually have stable policies, and we all have well-established policies. Otherwise, it would have been a dream. These are all the indications that what we can do in the upcoming 10 years, which I will mention later. Of course, while we are actually very proud of all these successes, especially in the last 3 to 4 years, we've just started to lose some momentum. I think it's important to mention that. In 2016, it is 1,400 megawatts of a wind power plant that we made operational, dropped down to 800, then 500, and then it goes down. By 2020, you know, quite a specific year. Why a special year, I should say? The last year of YEKDEM. So we were expecting a rush, actually a pile of projects that we expected at the beginning of the year. A week ago, we had a survey. We conducted a survey and what the effect of COVID-19 was, and for 2020, that is to say, the last year of YEKDEM, what is the size of the project portfolio that will be there? I also would like to touch upon that. For the time being, for 25 investors we have, wind power plants that is in construction corresponding to 2,300 megawatts. And according to the information received, 1,200 megawatt until October 31. At least one turbine will be commissioned, and at the same time, the guarantee will start. And as for the remaining part, by December 31, again, minimum one turbine will be commissioned and the acceptance will be done. So they will actually utilize the YEKDEM. But I think there are two things important to mention in here. Actually, the negative impact of COVID-19 started to be observed by February, March as a supply chain, especially from the side of China. Why? Because which components will be coming from where, it's actually not easy. And there's actually a total that was uncertainty where it would be going. But China succeeded in doing this in actually 2 months, and therefore they speed up some of the business items and they actually try to compensate for this. That was actually one effect of COVID-19. And at the same time, as you all know, certain permits should be taken for the wind power plants. And these are the bureaucratic work packages. And due to the COVID-19 pandemics, it slowed down. Some of the institutions closed down, some restricted or actually worked in less hours. And with the effect of all these things, I can say, as for the projects that we've planned for, March, April, especially for commissioning, moved to October. You know, in Turkey during the summer months, it's not appropriate to make installation because it's the high wind season in Turkey. And therefore, it's very challenging actually because you have to keep your team waiting there. And as you all know, the installations are mostly performed during fall, spring. The problem is that it is 2,300 megawatts work of a wind power plant will be included under the scope of YEKDEM, we are saying, but there are two assumptions underlying. One is at the supply side, especially at the erection side, there will be no shortage. That's the assumption. There will be no supply problem. That's the assumption that we have. But there are signs that it is not going on that track. You know, because we actually have certain number of blitz and they all planned 4 weeks. Therefore, any shift in one project will be moved to the other. And the second thing is that in the upcoming 4 months, COVID-19 will not affect the construction. This is also another assumption. So by February, before the Ministry of Energy, Undersecretariat for Treasury, for the Energy Market Regulatory Authority, we talked to them and we actually tried to share all the experiences that we had by way of certain surveys, and some of the institutions at the same time provide us some feedback and some experiences and the best practices in abroad. And therefore, we all put them all together. Therefore, all these projects, I can say, may not be completed as scheduled because we actually have an impact of 6 to 7 months of the pandemic. So it's still uncertain. So we asked for postponing it by 6 to 8 months. So we also tell them that COVID-19 should be considered as force majeure. And the authorities are considering this. And I was in Ankara last week. These are, of course, unofficial messages, but probably in 4 to 6 months, probably without any condition, and probably we actually probably will be postponed and some period will be given, I guess. Time extension probably will be given, but you have to work hard as if no time extension will be given at all, because it is of vital importance that the turbines should be made operational. Because as you all know, we are not doing these things for 5 years, for 10 years. It is for solar, for wind. We would like to increase our installed capacity. But of course, at the same time, we will ask for favor from the same banks, from the same stakeholders. So I believe that this must be considered as a force majeure, and there is a need for some flexibility. Otherwise, once, for example, we go to the same people at the saying that we need installed capacity, I mean, they should not actually ask the question, nothing happened during the COVID. And we tell all the bureaucrats and the authorities, so I believe that it is accepted by the authorities at a large extent, I can say. It is for all renewables. We also had a meeting together with the different presidents of the societies for renewables. And I believe that this actually will be very helpful for the wind industry in Turkey. I can say that's all I can say. So back to you, Güray. Thank you. I was about to ask you to wrap up because we have almost 150 participants at Zoom, so 150 at YouTube, so almost a conference of 300 people, I can say. So it is actually like digital media that we can do it, and we actually enjoy a lot doing this webinar. My request from the attendees, please ask your questions and write them down so we can ask the questions. So Fatih, actually, I would like to move. And when we were together with you, Fatih, I think it was 2019 December during the press conference. And we stated that this is actually quite an important project for Turkey, especially we mentioned about localization as well. And it was a nice atmosphere altogether. Today, we have a new development for Turkey. As you all know, the discovery of the natural gas at the Black Sea. And whenever we meet you, something nice happens about the energy industry in Turkey. And I hope that after today, with regards to wind energy, some new good developments will happen from now on. So, inside all energy investments, you mentioned that the share of the wind energy is actually a bright spot and a good resilience shown. And especially in the midterm and the long term in particular, I can say, after the post-COVID-19 era, do you think the investments in renewables actually will have a higher margin after the COVID? Can we say it in the field? Thank you, Güray. That's right. Last December, when we met, we discussed about these issues, and there's one thing that I remember very well, and actually it was the beauty of the Bosphorus. We had the meeting at Ortaköy, and it was actually a great view. And unfortunately, one of the bad things about the pandemics, I guess, is that this year I could not actually fully enjoy Istanbul because I failed to come to Istanbul, to Turkey. I'm actually trapped in Paris and cannot leave. So that is the situation that we have now. Well, you mentioned about natural gas, about the discovery of the natural gas. And a couple of days ago, I made an announcement in Turkey. And I think today, after you announced this meeting, a couple of people asked me a question. So we now discovered the natural gas. What is the point in looking for the wind? No need for wind anymore. I actually would like to answer that question so people will have an open mind. Let's put things properly in context, I should say. Now, natural gas at the gas field of Sakarya, or the potential gas, better to say. The generation of the natural gas is going to be 1/3 of the total demand of Turkey. It means that 2/3 of this will be imported, and it only can cover for 1/3. Of course, if there are no further discoveries, I mean, that's what Turkish Petroleum Incorporation is telling us with the figures. These are the potentials. So the electricity demand of Turkey, I can say, is actually increasing faster than all the other European countries. Therefore, in my opinion, for the renewables, wind, solar, if you're asking me, will be playing a major role in covering for the demand. as you all know, thousands of meters of depth that you have to get into, get the natural gas out, and so. But as you all know, you don't have to go down for the wind. What you have to do is just erect your turbines. Same for solar. And if you're asking me, these are the most important natural resources of Turkey. As for the current deficit, if you believe that it's a major issue, which it is, I should say, therefore, I should say wind is of critical importance and will have a positive contribution, no doubt about this. According to our calculations for the time being, wind, actually both Giles and Hakan already mentioned, of course, we had a lot of breakthrough in terms of wind. Maybe recently we actually pressed the brake pedal, but despite all these breakthroughs, according to our figures, it is only less than 15% of the economic wind potential that we are using in Turkey. There's a huge potential, both onshore and offshore, a huge potential that we have. I'd like to start with the onshore mainly. That's the reason why the decision makers, the government authorities, and I have no doubt, but what they should do is the importance that we attach to natural gas should be the same with wind, with solar, with renewables. You can have different perspectives on this, including, for example, the current deficit. It also will be very helpful. Again, first global, then back to local. From the global perspective, this year, in renewable energy and especially in wind, we actually had resilience shown towards COVID and resilience of the health industry. Same for the wind energy. Why? I think the reason is that in many countries in wind, according to our figures, Hemi Bahar, a Turkish colleague of us, know all the figures about Turkey and the world. According to what Dean said, more than 90% of the potential in the wind is based actually on fixed price projects. So this is actually something that is for ease of us. Therefore, wind actually can stand still in many countries. And by 2021, in wind investments, I guess, there will be a huge leap forward. Looking at the markets, that's what we can say at the global level. There will be a rebound. There is a difference between wind and solar, which I'd like to touch upon. And as you all know, we work with all governments from China, Brazil, India, and all. We work with all countries. And during the COVID era, in solar, with regard to supply chain, many troubles occurred, especially because of what happened in China. So many countries suffered from the supply chain in solar, but wind is actually more global, a more global industry. And that's the reason why we did not have that much trouble in supply chain. Of course, we had some, but not as much as the solar, I can say. So we actually had less challenges. So this is another thing I would like to underline. So again, back to Turkey. As you mentioned, Hakan, you mentioned about by the end of the year, whether we will continue or we will stop. Now, I'm a person who is closely looking at the Turkish wind industry, but staying away, I can say. And my point is that I think the support to wind should not only continue, but more support should be given to wind in Turkey, because Turkey has a huge potential. And it really would be would not be appropriate not to make full use of this potential. I think the policies should be strengthened, and in the wind energy, as Giles mentioned, in Europe, actually wind has a major role, and if you're asking me, it can actually play a more major role, not only in Europe, but in the region. As I told you, I am a person who is closely watching the Turkish industry at a distance. As a colleague of you, I believe the support should continue, but more support should be given, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatih Bey. To be honest, it's really a privilege for us to hear your opinion, since you're a person who is sitting in that position with a multi-tier and multi-perspective. And I have to say that it's really been remarkable to hear your opinion. Thank you very much. I'd like to continue with Giles. The same question to you, Mr. Dixon, but slightly different.
For sure, renewable energy shown its resilience over this pandemic. Do you consider wind being more immune than any other renewable source, energy source, as industry, as generation source at European scale?
Yes, we do, for a number of reasons. First of all, wind is using a local natural resource. You're not having to import fuel. So it's much easier to be resilient. Secondly, as Fatih Bey has correctly said, the global wind industry is a truly global industry. There is manufacturing all over Europe, all over the world. It is also, if I may add this, a global industry in the sense that the supply chain is highly globalized. So wind turbines made in Turkey will be using glass fiber and, in some cases, steel that is imported from China and elsewhere in Asia. In Europe, we are now even importing gearboxes from China for the wind turbines that we are manufacturing inside Europe. So it is an increasingly complex global supply chain, but we can manage that provided there is free trade. Okay. Third factor that makes wind resilient is that it is politically attractive. It is good for jobs and growth. And governments around the world today, in the COVID context, are thinking more than anything, how can we drive recovery? And as Fatih Bey said at the very beginning, the energy sector is a very good sector for driving economic recovery. And within that, renewable energy and within that wind are particularly good sectors for helping to drive economic recovery. Building a wind farm is something that you can do fairly quickly. You can create jobs quickly, generate revenue quickly.
Thanks a lot, Giles.
Hakan, you mentioned that it's the last year of YEKDAM this year. So this year we've been seeing intensive investment, particularly in wind. All entrepreneurs are working quite hard, of course, by taking precautions for the pandemic. So by 2021, a new era will be started, a new decade will be started. So it's the post-pandemic time. What do you think? I mean, as of the 1st of January, what do you think about the outlook in the next decade? I mean, Fatih Bey emphasized something really critical a moment ago. In the last 15 years, there have been tremendous time, effort, and money spent for building and improving the wind sector in Turkey. I mean, building one by one all these wind farms in the mountains and the hilly sides of Turkey, I mean, is really huge. And it's not something that can be calculated only in terms of the non-imported goods. It's also about employment. It's also about the opportunities to be given to our young people to be synchronized with their international peers. I mean, it's also something to do with also giving the chance of employing our young people who are working in the wind farms. They can find jobs, I mean, everywhere around the world, because it's something that's up to experience. Wind has made all of this possible in the last decade, and has given us a lot. Therefore, unless we build correct mechanisms, that would be a pity. I mean, for all this effort that we've done in the last decade, I have to say that the huge performance that we've shown, which I think have to say is rare in Turkey to have such a high performance in a given area, which we managed quite effectively. Like, for instance, the natural gas turbines. It's really very easy. You would bring gas, you would bring some concrete, you would just fix it, I mean, with all the connections, and then in 1 year you will get the effect, but the gas will come from abroad. I mean, maybe with some contributions in Turkey. Now that wind was able to start this revolution in Turkey, we have to bring it to the next tier, bring it to the next step. So now all the genetics, all the DNA is known for the wind energy. You know what kind of improvements you can give in particular countries. You know how to improve the installed capacity. You know how to improve your experiences. Is wind resilient against COVID? I mean, the wind power plant, 2,500 megawatts, built in Turkey, regardless of COVID. We're all out in the site, regardless of the COVID time. So by starting the correct mechanisms, I mean, and have you ever heard any of the factories shut down in Turkey? I mean, just on the contrary, I can see the name of Gökhan amongst the attendees. A factory with 3,000 employees was assigned to start another factory in India. So it's a remarkable experience. I mean, since the country has the potential of exporting and can export 60 to 70% of the entire capabilities, and since all the world has not been affected equally, I have to say that there is an equal distribution of the supply chain. And we have also investors, not only in Turkey, but also in Romania and other parts of the world, in different parts of the world. So probably Fatih Bey is more knowledgeable about the figures, but a lot of money is to be spent in the next decade. Now that we've taken a very long distance, a very good distance in the last decade, it would be a pity if we give up on wind. I mean, the natural gas down on Earth, it will be always there. Yes, I mean, it doesn't matter if you take it out or not, but the wind will never be depleted. Now that we've gained momentum, we better move on with foreseeable risks, and we have to start a mechanism with the risk is foreseeable. And the YEKDEM mechanism, as very nicely said by Fatih Bey, was just functioning. Why? Because 90% of it was based on a fixed price guarantee. But why would the investment still continue so as to reach a fixed price guarantee? That's why our investors continued working. This can be, I mean, a mechanism that can just be based on auction or some other mechanism, doesn't matter which one. It is important to start a financeable, a fundable mechanism. Only then we can move on both on the industrialization and in the installed capacity. We have the problem, I mean, we name the problem as COVID today, but but maybe 8 months later it will be something else. And immunity against these problems can only be achieved by maximizing natural resources. Hakan, thank you very much. Fatih Bey will have to leave in a few minutes, so the last question I'd like to pose to him quickly. The Executive Director of IEA, Fatih Bey. We know there is an article that the IEA has published, and it's now time to start the energy innovation for the world. This is the title of the latest publication. And with economic recovery, do you think mixed emission units will increase? Do you think there will be such a trend? And with the energy innovation, how would you expect recovery? Yes, Güray Bey. To be honest, governments around the world are having trouble, mainly due to COVID today. I mean, first, of course, the health of the citizens and how to cope with this problem. This is the #1 concern of all governments around the world. But the second, the next item on the agenda is how to recover the economy. This is the next concern. Whichever government you would go today, they are, dealing with these two major issues, health and economy. Now we think, and by the way, I have to say that many governments currently are working a lot to prepare economic packages, stimulus packages, to make sure that their economy is getting to recovery. Millions and trillions of dollars of course, depending on the country, of packages are being introduced to strengthen their economies. They're just thinking about these huge packages. In these new economic packages, which incentives should be there for energy? Which types of energy will be given priority? This is extremely important. And the money, the amounts we are talking about is quite huge. And as of early August, around the globe, of course, we're now speaking about $9.5 trillion of such packages, and we expect it to amount to $20 trillion by the end of this year. So which energy types will be a part of it? The money is so big that the next 2-3 decades will be dictated by these investments. I mean, it's a lot of money. Therefore, we've sat around the table with IMF and worked on it for a sustainable economic plan. So the look is for 2021, 22, 23. And we discussed which energy policies must be introduced into the economic recovery packages so that the economies will grow, unemployment will go down, and at the same time, as discussed a moment ago, a rebound effect will be prevented in emissions. You have to make some empathy, of course, for the governments, because the governments are now dealing with health issues plus economic growth, unemployment, and what possibly can bring all of these together? I mean, which energy policies can bring all of these together? Here, renewables, particularly solar and wind, come to assist economic recovery quite quickly by providing new jobs and at the same time by resolving the energy problems quite quickly. Maybe I can end up with a promising thing. My last sentences may be quite promising to you. Last month, on July the 9th, just to give you a perspective of the interest, the international interest into this, I'm not making propaganda. 40 ministers from many parts of the world attended Clean Energy Transition Summit organized by our agency. Clean Energy Summit.
they attended the summit. 40 ministers. I mean, it's been a first time in history. For the first time ever in history, many, of course, you know, renowned people, the ministers, American, Chinese, Canadian, European ministers, Indian, African, they're all the ministers attended the summit. And I'm just telling you this because the countries who have attended the summit, so say, for instance, some big countries, not to name any, but they said the climate change is not considered as #1 priority today. And yet they attended the summit because the investment that is currently being done in wind is I mean, totally up to money. It boils down to money. I mean, it's just merely due to economic reasons. It's just about bringing up the economy of the countries so that their concern of competing against other countries or other economies can be overcome. That's the mere reason, the only reason why all of these people attended the summit. So after having made all of these investments, all of these attempts in Turkey for improving wind, I think there are two ways to go. Either we can just continue in that direction, or we will just put in garbage all the efforts and all the pain into this and then continue in another direction, which I think would be a pity. So I believe that the authorities will do their best in extending deadlines, as many countries did, including China and India. And I think there will be something positive going on. They will take a positive position in extending deadlines in that direction. And once again, as I said, as someone who has been watching the Turkish energy sector, maybe from a distance, but cautiously and closely, my personal humble opinion is that all these efforts should not be wasted, and that Turkey should just start taking quicker and immediate steps forward. With your permission, I will have to leave because there is a phone call that I have to attend. I'd like to thank you, Giles and Hakan, for their contribution. Hopefully, in the near future, we will be able to physically meet, hopefully in Istanbul, Ortaköy, before the wonderful year. Maybe then celebrating the extended deadlines, hopefully. We'll be together back again. Thank you very much, Fatih Bey, for all the contribution, for giving your opinion on the ideal situation for the world and for Turkey. And of course, you're always welcomed in Istanbul by the Bosphorus. Thank you.
This question is coming from the audience. So as wind energy has 3 different sub-business domains, like the industrial manufacturing, project investments, investors, and consultants or scientific areas. What are the lessons learned of those 3 different groups over pandemic, as far as you have seen, as far as you are witnessing?
So there are many different components of the wind energy value chain. Those are 3 of them. It's one way of dividing up the business. There's lots of other people who are crucial to the value chain. Don't forget the transmission and distribution system operators. We were talking a moment ago with Fatih Bey. How can governments most effectively spend their COVID or post-COVID stimulus money on the expansion of renewables? There are 2 answers to that question for wind. The first answer is grid investments. We build out wind energy, whether onshore or offshore. We need to build out the grids, both transmission and distribution. That requires a lot of capital investments. The second answer to that question, how best to spend stimulus money to support wind, is Yes, wind creates jobs and growth quickly. Fantastic. That's good for recovery. But they're different types of energy investments to those we have traditionally made because they are very capex heavy. Wind involves huge upfront capital expenditure. The OPEX is very low because you're not having to pay for the ongoing supply of fuel. Now, because wind is capex heavy, we are very sensitive to finance costs and capital costs. So governments should look at ways of putting their stimulus money into financial instruments that will help to minimize the capital costs and financing costs for wind farm developers when they invest in new wind farms. Auctions play a key role in that. Successful government auctions require some financial support. It doesn't need too much, but putting financial support in crucially minimizes the capital costs, which can make a huge difference in total project lifetime costs.
Yes, thank you very much for all those comments, opinions, and your time dedicated to this webinar.
My pleasure.
Actually, just a couple of minutes beyond the schedule, I would like to thank to all the distinguished speakers. We have received your valuable comments. Of course, to stay healthy, we need uninterrupted and sustainable energy. It's inevitable, and therefore we have to continue with the renewables and the wind energy. And just like the motto we mentioned, wind energy is actually the cause of the country for us. So as the TWEA family, I would like to thank to all who contributed for the organization of this webinar and hope to see you in our next webinar. Thank you.